So, Berto, I thought we would read some patron emails and respond to them. What do you say?
Oh, like my favorite activity of the day.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I clean phone screens.
You clean phone screens.
They get pretty dirty.
Yeah. Do you just grab people's phones and wipe them on your shoulder?
No. I have an automated process.
Oh, what's that like?
I have a little thing where I can grab 3 at a time and wipe them on my sleeve.
All right. This first one is from patron Tom, and he has an email about cultural appropriation and finger pointing.
Oh.
So patron Tom says, I saw a blog post about a Twitter post that has recently gone viral.
Blog post about a Twitter post. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, that's the world.
It's a girl that wore a traditional Chinese dress to her prom. Now everyone on Twitter is going nuts about how offensive this is and shaming and bullying her as if she has done something terribly wrong.
Right.
Now, before I say anything else, I am more than willing to respect other people's cultures and hear people out when they are offended by something. The girl has said she wore the dress because she thought it was beautiful. I honestly don't see anything wrong with that. So before we get into talking about this, I just want to give some background in case people don't know. There's a Utah teen. She's 18 years old. It's the end of her school year, and she is going to prom. And she doesn't look entirely white. She looks
right.
She looks something else,
Right.
And I think her name, but I don't, I didn't read what her ethnicity was. But the point is that she doesn't look Asian, but she also doesn't look white.
Her name is Kezia Daum.
Yeah. So I don't know. And Utah, and she posted a picture on Twitter of her and her friends, in their prom dresses. And she's the only one who's not in a traditional prom dress. Everyone else has the regular tuxedos and the regular prom, with the puffy sleeves and all that kind of stuff. And she has this very traditional red Chinese dress. And this, for some reason, it got picked up by people on Twitter and outrage began. Which is sort of weird because I'm just thinking how many things get posted on Twitter that just never. I mean, the amount of things that people could get outraged about on Twitter. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of anger. For example, someone was interviewed or tweeted or something, and they said, "This isn't okay. I wouldn't wear traditional Korean, Japanese, or any other traditional dress, and I'm Asian. I wouldn't wear traditional Irish or Swedish or Greek dress either. There's a lot of history behind these clothes." Another person says, "I'm proud of my culture. For it to simply be subject to American consumerism and cater to a white audience is parallel to colonial ideology." Another detail here is that according to some news sources, or one news source that I read, and so God knows, they reached out to some people in China and asked them how they felt about it. And they, at least these individuals reporting to the reporter, indicated that they didn't care. And they actually thought it was kind of cool that Americans were honoring their culture. Berto, what do you think about this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, so I try to imagine if a gal had worn a traditional Colombian, like a cumbia dress.
What does that look like?
It's a very fluffy, is that a word? It is a word, but is it a word for dresses? I don't know. It's got ruffles, I guess.
Okay.
It's a broad skirt.
I'm thinking
all the way to the floor, colorful with flowers embroidered in, and sort of like shoulder thingies. Look, I don't know how to describe dresses. Okay, it's pretty, it's colorful, very traditional looking,
like a folksy dress.
Yes, and they use it to dance cumbia with, right? All right, if someone wore that to their prom, I don't know anyone from that side of the fence, like my country, that would be like. I mean, I could see it if they're making fun of it somehow, right? It's like, these ridiculous native customs or something, or whatever.
But if they weren't.
But if they're, I don't understand where there is a controversy.
Yeah.
Now, again, let's say that someone was wearing a dress or some outfit Oh, for example, let's say you're a male or of male persuasion, whatever. Like you dress in a male outfit that is very much like a Nazi uniform or looks very much like a Nazi uniform. Okay, well, that's a whole separate thing, right? Or or even something that's from a culture and you don't know much about it, and it turns out that that's like a very oppressive regime's uniform or something like that. I could understand. But even then, like a little benefit of the doubt, because like if it's not something that everyone's really aware of, maybe there was no ill intent. What I find is nowadays, the assumption is that you have ill intent. And there is a very, very thin skin. Everyone's got like really, really triggered responses to everything. So you wear a dress, it's like, oh, in fact, I bet you there were people responding very strongly to this that are not even Chinese, that were offended for the Chinese, right? Like they're like, I'm not Chinese, but I bet you it's really offensive to them.
Right. There's something about the pictures that I think could have provoked it as well. The people, aside from the girl, and I say girl because she's 18,
right.
I guess I could call her a woman,
right.
but she's the only one who, at least, skin tone wise,
right.
is not total white bread,
right.
and Utah, and they just look extremely, I don't know what you call it, middle America or something. And it just, if this was someone in Seattle, for example, and there were Asians in the picture with her, or they're in a city where things are considered to be more liberal or something, I think this was like, oh, people on the other team are blah, blah, blah. But to me, as soon as I heard this, because, I saw it all too, and I had a very similar reaction. I was like, what? Like, just a dress? That seems a little weird. Why would you get upset about that? But then actually, I started thinking, wait a second. What is all this Twitter outrage what's the amount of Twitter outrage that's actually happening? Because Tom, he read a blog.
Right.
About something that happened on Twitter.
So is the actual reaction people reacting to a fake or to a made up great reaction?
So all I've heard no one attack this girl. I've only heard people attacking
some made up attack
or very isolated events of this girl being. Now, I don't know. Maybe she was attacked by a billion people on the planet, but to me, as the first story I saw, which would have been like maybe minutes after this thing got going, was everyone has thin skin, everyone's an idiot, Twitter is stupid, and so I instantly like, well, this is outrage about outrage. Like we have now gone up our own ass.
Outrage. Well, but I will say, like, so there was this tweet that was like from this guy Jeremy Lamb, I guess. My culture is not your goddamn prom dress. And then it got like 178,000 likes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So who are these people liking that tweet?
Wow. It's okay. So that's something. But so the other thing I think is, well, are these Russians? Because I always have to. You always have to throw that in there.
Yeah. Well, now you do.
And trolls, right? Trolls and Russians, who are just trying to destabilize our I don't know what you even call it.
And it's actually, can you imagine? Like, this is an 18-year-old girl thrust unwittingly and unwantingly into a very public limelight for something that in her mind was completely innocuous.
Right.
And it wasn't completely innocuous in the way that some totally clueless people in this country and other countries do actual racist things. Like, this was essentially, she picked out a prom dress and she's like, oh my God, I love that. Like, this wasn't satire. She wasn't going to her prom looking in a satirical way. No, she wanted to look beautiful.
Yeah.
Right. It's unfortunate that, so either case is unfortunate.
Well,
it's triggering a lot of us.
So I have advice for both sides, but the first thing I want to do is explain why all of these, because I'm Asian, and I have to say that I totally understand where 175,000 people on Twitter would like that person's comment, and I can see why people would say those things. from the outside, and I'm guessing, Berto, you might understand, but if for white Americans, they'll just be like, they won't get it at all. They won't even have a hypothetical as to how someone gets there, and let me provide it. And I don't blame anyone for not understanding this, because no one is explaining this, and I'll get into that in a second. But basically, it's, and I've talked about this before in the podcast, it's the culmination of thousands of events of actual racism that is very easily identifiable by anyone as like, oh yeah, that's racist, like name calling. As an Asian American, I've been called a gook, a Chinaman, a boater. I've been told to go home. I mean, you're Colombian. You've heard things like this too. Right. A slope, yellow face, ching chong, so it's always funny too, because it's like I'm Japanese, and so they don't really have very good Japs for, I guess, dirty Jap but most people, they just think Chinaman, and I always find that to be, it'd be if someone called you like a Mexican,
which they do all the time,
right? But like thinking you are Mexican,
which they think all the time,
right, and it's like, you're just insulting yourself at that point, and always being treated like you're a foreigner, always seeing you're the foreigner in the TV show. People asking me my entire fucking life if I speak Japanese. And I know it's well-meaning, and I never get angry at it, but I'm like, did I ask you if you speak fucking German? Do you know what I mean? The vast majority, the biggest white ethnicity in the United States is German, at last I checked. I've never asked anyone if they speak German, and the likelihood that they are closer to their immigrant heritage is higher than it is for me. One, because my white side goes back to the 1600s, and they're all English, most of them, to some unfortunate extent, because you got slave owners and stuff. Right. But my Japanese ancestors came over in around 1900. My grandparents barely spoke Japanese. My grandfather didn't speak Japanese really at all, and so to ask me if I speak Japanese is like, whenever people ask me, I'm just like, because my dad, he's 100% Japanese. Yeah. He doesn't speak a word of Japanese, not a word. And the words he does know, the few words that he does know, and the words that he passed on to me are all wrong, because they're all like telephone, because they get passed down through the generations. Like until like, I might have talked about this before, but until like, I went to Japan 10 years ago, and went with Stu, and he he's a white guy from Georgia, I believe, North Carolina, accent from the South. Right. He knows much more about Japanese culture than anyone in my family. We go to Japan, and he looks at this thing, and he's like, "Oh, senbei," and I'm like, "Oh, what's senbei?" He's like, "Oh, it's rice crackers. They make it on the street," and I'm like, "Oh, like simbe." And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Well, simbe, right? Simbe." He's like, "What are you saying?" And I'm like, "Simbe, rice crackers, simbe." And he says, that's a nonsensical word that doesn't mean anything. And he's like a Japanese translator. He knows, like so he's a white guy, a redhead. Yeah. When he talks on the phone, people think he's Japanese. Anyway. So he's explaining this, and then I'm like, well, where did we get this word from? I go back home, ask my dad, where'd you get simbe from? He's like, well, that's what we called it in our family. And I go, Dad, did you know that that's not a real word? The real word is senbei, which are two different syllables. You got sim, like Simbe. Like Sim City,
like Simba.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be sen. So that's completely different. And instead of be, you're supposed to have bei. Anyway,
senbei.
That's how non-Japanese I am. You know what I mean? So for people to ask me if I speak Japanese, I'm just like, ridiculous. Stereotypes about being smart, but of course that's true. I'm a genius. Knowing martial arts, which I don't. Being asked to be a gardener. I've talked about this before. Being asked if someone has sponsored my ability to be in North America.
Oh,
did I tell you about that one?
I don't think you did.
In Canada, I'm in sort of rural Canada.
Were you at the time curating your bonsai collection?
I was in rural Canada. I talked about this recently on the podcast. You weren't here, and some Canadians reached out to me and were like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry that these Canadians did this to you." And I'm like, Canadians are just as capable of being fucking racist as Americans. You know what I mean? And it doesn't have anything to do with Canadian versus American versus Mexican versus anything. It just has to do with how much you understand ethnicity and immigration and stuff. And the more rural place you are, like whenever I step outside Seattle and if someone asks me my name, there's always jokes.
Right.
In Seattle, I never get a joke. I say Kirk Honda, they're like, okay. Big fucking deal, because they hear weird names all the time that they don't recognize. You step a foot into
I'm pretty sure when I met you, I said, like my car.
Yeah, you go to Duval, Washington, or Centralia, or Spokane for that matter, and I say Kirk Honda, and they're just like, oh, what? Kirk what?
You have a car?
Honda, like the car? Oh, it's like this whole fucking ordeal, like. Yes, I have a name that happens to coincide with an automobile, like
hey, at least yours is like laughter and curiosity. Mine is confused looks. They're like, well, whatever it is, you must know because it's your name. So
yeah, that must be frustrating too, right? So being made fun of about the food that I by the way, so the sponsored bit was some Canadian older people asked me who sponsored me to come to the United States.
Ah, got it.
As if I was a foreigner and not only that, but I needed some sponsorship, which I hadn't even heard of anyway.
Right.
Being made fun of about the food I eat when I was in college, just, like I just ate the traditional Japanese American food and people would just be like, what are you eating? Or I have pictures on my wall of my ancestors, which I kind of consider to be a Japanese thing.
Right.
And people are like, why do you have these creepy old people on your wall?
What?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Being pulled over in small towns, a little bit more often, particularly when I was young, particularly when I had a crappier car.
You know what's insane about this, by the way, is you've actually dealt with way more of this kind of stuff than I have.
Well, or you didn't notice.
Well, no, I certainly, there is a fair amount of that, but I also maybe didn't live, because most of my time here I've lived in Seattle.
Okay.
So it's not too bad.
Right. So Lakeview, Tacoma?
Lakewood, yeah.
Lakewood? So you didn't get any in Lakewood?
My physics teacher, notably, so I was the best student in his class and I sat like up front and he would always make these jokes. And I always thought it was fine because, I don't know, I thought he was...
What jokes did he make?
Like about Colombia. So anyways, he would always tell these stories. Half of his class was these stories he would tell. Because he liked reading these fishing books and these... Anyways, so he would tell these stories. But he'd be telling a story and then he'd be like, oh, you must know about that, right? With your Uncle Pablo.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that, right? Cocaine jokes, Uncle Pablo jokes.
It'd be like, again, looking at a white guy and just sort of, and he has a last name like Smith or something, or
Stein,
or Heidenberg or something, and you're like, well, like your Uncle Hitler.
Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean? It's exactly.
How many Jews did you kill?
Right, exactly. Oh yeah, you don't. If you're Shlomo, stay away from Heidelberg over here. He's gonna gas you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that bad. Now, what people will say is that have never been through this. They'll be like, "Hey, that's just a little bit of making fun of."
Which is what I thought.
Yeah.
But and in fact, it was other people that pointed out. In fact, some of my Asian friends that pointed out to me is like, "That's not okay."
Yeah.
And I was like, "What do you mean?" Because every class he would do this. So it was after the fact that I realized, wow, that was really bully behavior.
Well, not only that, but even if they hadn't, even if because 99.999% of the time that someone does one of these things that we call microaggressions or even macroaggressions, I laugh it off because I don't want to cause a scene. I just want to get through my day. I don't want to confront every bullshit thing I see. So the vast majority of these things, I just like, it's innocent. He's ignorant. Oh, he's old. Or, these are rural people in Canada. I'm not going to say anything to them. But you take a fucking lifetime of this. Yeah. And especially if you're a Chinese immigrant with an accent. Right. Or a black person who lives in America, you deal with this every day and you let it go and you say, it's fine. I just want to get to work. I just want to buy my fucking burrito and I'm going to smile and I'm going to look on the bright side. And you do this over and over again. I go to people's homes and they have Asian art. White people, they'll have Asian art in their place. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure you have no idea what that Chinese character says. I'm pretty sure you just,
Well, but people have art all the time that they have literal understanding of, or,
having a picture of, a abstract painting of a sailboat in the Sound is much safer in terms of like cultural appropriation.
Yeah, but no one would know what its significance is or whatever. Right?
To have a person with the last name of Roosevelt in, someone that I know or who has something of Japanese in their house, and they haven't proven to me that they understand that someone in their fucking family imprisoned my family members.
I see.
It's like, and you're just gonna fucking have a Japanese trinket in your house, and you think that's okay. You know what I mean? It's like, again, to me, it's like you're a Jewish person and you see, someone with Nazi heritage walking around with some Jewish prayer shawl draped over a lamp. You know what I mean? It can get that weird, man. I
just don't think that there's any cultural knowledge that you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, true. And when I see stuff like that, and I never say anything.
Yeah.
But Buddhist stuff, Shinto, these are religions.
But then shouldn't it make it upset if you go to another country and see American stuff?
Yes.
But that doesn't work.
Because
MTV's,
because you don't care, because if you are mainstream, this is a thing. And I guess to some extent to you, unless you've been through it, you'll probably never understand the death by 1,000 cuts that this is like. Again, every incident is minor,
but it's who is at fault is the question.
Right. So I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm not saying that this girl with the dress is supposed to be attacked.
Right.
I'm just saying I understand why.
You understand where that anger or frustration comes from.
Right. People have tattoos with like sacred things. People look to China and Tibet and they hang prayer flags and they drive around in their fucking $100,000 car and they don't donate to the cause of Tibet or anything. And they contribute to the Chinese, economy, which is in turn is oppressing, they don't give a fuck. And they'll have like a Tibetan flag in their house as if they understand what the fuck, because they're like, ooh, I like Buddhism because it seems nice to them. It's like, you don't understand Buddhism, my friend. There's like 2.5 billion Buddhists on the planet.
But Buddhism has no claim on anything. There is no special religious significance to any of it. Meaning, if you're not it's irrelevant. It only matters to someone who believes, right? So it's like someone getting upset if someone has let's say someone goes to watch the Book of Mormon in another country or this country, whatever, and a Mormon person gets super upset that they're defacing their faith. It's like, well, that's your faith. We don't believe in it.
Well, I haven't seen Book of Mormon, and I know Mormons who have seen Book of Mormon and have really enjoyed it.
Yeah. It doesn't trash it or anything.
Right. So tonally, I think they must.
But the creators are not Mormon.
Right.
And it's being shown and enjoyed by tons of people that are
but
not. But
tonally, they must, I'm guessing, at least they have empathy. Again, if someone had had a Buddhist thing in their house and I walk into the house and they're like, "Oh, you're Japanese." I have this little Buddhist trinket. I have no idea what it means. Yeah. I'd be like, okay, thank you for saying something along those lines.
Okay.
A similar thing is actually Japan does this. They fetishize Christianity.
Yeah.
And now people in America be like, well, I don't care if people in Japan. Well, of course you don't care, because this was just one example that I'm going to tell you of something that I experience, numerically on a weekly basis since I was born. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But like Japanese people, the last I heard, and they're always, Japan is a very strange country, very odd, like kitschy behavior that goes on. But one of the things that they do that I heard is that they have weddings in Christian style. So even though they're not Christian,
right.
I mean, there are many Christian,
but they
Japanese
like
people.
the order of operations.
Yeah, because they've seen it in a movie or something,
right.
and they're not super religious Japanese people.
Right.
So they, sometimes they go full Shinto, but and full Buddhist, but sometimes they're just like, and they have chapels that if you walked into it, you'd be like, this is how a foreigner would devise a chapel, a Christian chapel. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You're like, nothing
they
looks...
don't get everything quite right.
Everything looks wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? But to them, it looks authentic, right? And they'll even have like priests...
Like they have an anime Jesus.
Yeah, it just looks weird. But to them, it's basically a theme park.
Yeah.
So... Now, to an American, they're like, well, I don't care. But again, imagine if you lived in that country and everyone in that country basically looked at you as a substandard human, or at least a percentage, and then they take your culture and just fuck with it because they think it's funny or fun to do. Yeah. Like, ooh, Buddhist, that's fun. I think I'll just dabble in Buddhism. Do you know what I mean?
But the extreme of that is you printed a picture of this prophet I believe in. I'm going to murder you and your family.
No,
right?
No. That's a whole other
because they
scenario.
Feel that there is this fundamentalist sect.
No, I'm not. I'm saying these are little hurts.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with aggression. I want to be clear.
Okay.
This has to do with pain.
Sure.
I have it. You've experienced. Everyone has experienced just pain. This has nothing to do with aggression. This has nothing to do with fucking Twitter. This has nothing to do with Donald Trump or political correctness or anything. It's just tiny little
adds
cuts.
Up to like this.
Being called a Chinaman, being called a gook, locking my family in a prison.
Right.
People thinking that I'm irrelevant, that I'm a foreigner. I'm not a real American. Do you know how many times the Republicans have said an example of a real American?
Right.
And I am not included you're not included in that.
Right.
Totally. Joe Plumber is included in that, even though his grandparents came from Germany.
Right.
And he doesn't understand the Constitution as well as I understand it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I had relatives who fought in every major war. I mean, even the War of 1812, for crying out loud, I have relatives who fought in it. Do you know what I mean? And these are not great wars. These are, not fantastic. These are questionable, things. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, it's like me. So take the Catholic religion. You know, all of Latin America pretty much is quite Catholic.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing because that's the religion that was brought down that annihilated all the natives.
Right.
Or it was essentially the power that, the Spanish Empire, at the top of the pyramid were the king and queen, and right next to them were the top of the church, right? In fact, they were considered sort of divine. Anyways, so nowadays, though, if you disrespect, the Catholicism, that's a big problem. That's a big no-no, right? Because it's, so ironically, most of my background is actually Iberian, like Spanish.
Uh-huh.
I don't identify with that. right? Even though I have very little, like I did one of those tests, the DNA things, and I was quite surprised to find out that I'm mostly from the Iberian Peninsula. My ancestors.
What percentage?
It's like 98% or something.
What's the other two?
Random other things. Like I don't even remember.
You don't have any native. You don't have any.
I don't know if I do.
Yeah. Well, everyone has like a little bit of like.
Must be a little bit.
Well, everyone has a little Neanderthal, so.
Probably. But the point is, I don't identify with that.
Or sorry, many people have a lot of a little bit of.
Like I identify more with like the sadness of tons of cultures throughout history getting decimated by more advanced cultures. At the same time, there's this hardship or this hard realization of, well, yet somehow we got to where we are today, and now we got to sort of like all coexist. So I have both experienced some of that, but also felt like some guilt of like, wow, my ancestors like really brutally exterminated a lot of people, right? And yet it was at a time where that was sort of like what you did.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, it makes sense that you would want to distance your identity, even though you had no idea,
right?
But you just invented a story, or your family invented a story.
It's not like we ever even talked about this. It's just
But in your head, you're
right.
like,
I'm certainly not Spanish.
I'm surely not one of the most egregious colonization, genocidal acts that has ever been imparted on this planet.
Certainly not.
Certainly not my ancestors. Maybe, 1/64th.
Yeah.
But not like more than that.
I was obviously sure that there was some Spanish there, because it's like clearly, but yeah, so there's that. And then at the flip side of it is, traditionally, I did not realize that racism was a thing until I was in my 20s. Like I didn't actually know that. As growing up in Colombia, like I wasn't taught. I didn't know about slavery. I didn't know about any of that stuff. And we had no black people in my school at all. We had one Asian person, and he did get teased mercilessly. But I didn't think of that as racism for some reason. He was my friend, but I just thought, oh, he's getting bullied, because like different people got bullied. So I thought, oh, he's unfortunately getting bullied, right? In my head, it wasn't like, wow, that's racism,
Well, because you just think that's just the way that it is.
Because the weak get bullied, right? That the weak get bullied. And in this case, he was weak because he was a minority.
Right.
And there were others that were weak for whatever reasons. And so the weak get bullied. And I thought, and I don't mean like ultimately weak. I mean, in the context of the moment, if they don't have the power, they get bullied by bullies. And that was what happened. And so I was like, oh man, that sucks. I remember having conversations with some of my girl friends about the show 21 Jump Street. And I was like, oh, who do you like and stuff? And they're like, oh, Johnny Depp, blah, blah. I was like, what about Dustin Nguyen? I don't know how to say it, but like the Asian guy, right? And they're like, ew, gross.
Right.
And I actually didn't understand what they meant.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? But they actually had this visceral reaction because they don't.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, the Asian guy on 21 Jump Street is a very attractive
guy.
Yeah.
They didn't pick him for that show on accident. It wasn't like, oh, we should grab an ugly Asian guy. Right. No. They grabbed sort of like a colorful cast of very good-looking people.
Right.
Like the girl was black.
Right.
Then they had like very attractive people in each category.
Right.
They had sort of like the big fat guy who wasn't fat at all, but just a slightly bigger version of Johnny Depp.
Right. And then they wanted a tough guy, so they got Greco.
Yeah. But anyways, that's the extent. And then later, when I was in my 20s, I visited Florida, and I was talking with some friends that were visiting from Colombia, and one of their friends was a manager at a local fast food place. And all of a sudden, he starts talking about all those N-word people that he works with. And he's just totally going off on this racist rant. Mm. And I'm like, I was like, do you not realize that in this country, we're minorities? Like, we get discriminated against? Like, and of course he didn't, because he lived in Florida. And I guess in that little cultural pocket, he was not a minority.
Well, and it's not as if Asians and Latino people, Latinx people aren't racist.
No. In fact, that's when I learned.
My grandma, who died last year at 101, I hate to admit this, but she didn't. I only knew of one incident that basically illuminated that she was afraid of black people.
Yeah.
And yeah, when I learned that, I was shocked.
Right.
I'm like, Grandma, you're Japanese. Like you're on our team.
Connect the dots.
Yeah, like you can't do that, you know. So
that was my shock too, because what happened is I left at 15 before I was exposed to more realities of the world. And when I started in Lakewood, my school had a ton of black people. So all of a sudden, this was not a like, oh, there's that one black. No, it's like wow, there's a lot of black people. And so in my head, I never actually went through a phase where my little pocket, we got to be discriminatory. Not only that, I feel like it would have been mentally impossible for me to ever think that way because my dad didn't teach me that way. Yeah. And because I lived in New York City when I was really little.
Yeah,
and all these other things.
My family was the same. When I bumped into anti-Semitism, I don't remember when it was, but it was later in life. And I remember just being completely confused.
Baffled.
Yeah, I'm like, people don't like Jewish people? Why don't they like Jewish people? What's wrong with Jewish people?
And actually, now that you mention it, that is something my dad is and or was fairly anti-Semitic. And I didn't get it because as a kid, sometimes he would rail against a Jewish person. And I was so confused.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. To
what?
me, I remember, I hate to say this, but I think I was an adult, when I first even, you see it in movies and stuff, but that I learned that actual Americans still hated Jewish people.
Well, yeah, I didn't know anything about World War II, let alone the Holocaust, any of that stuff growing up in Colombia. Like, I never heard of it.
Yeah.
So when I watched a movie on TV that was about World War II, I barely understood the context.
Yeah, I remember thinking when I heard about people hating Jewish people, I was like, so wait, people can just pick a random group and hate them? Like it felt like so you can just pick like people who grow sideburns and like you're gonna hate, like, why Jewish people? What's like
right
there to me, because I had Jewish friends growing up. To me, there was no distinguishable difference between
right.
Now of course to my Jewish friends, I'm sure they were walking around going, well, all the Christmas and all the Easter. Anyway, I want to take a break, and when we get back, I want to bring my big point to this whole thing. All right, we're back from the break, and as always, we harangue people to become patrons of the podcast. So if you haven't done that yet, just insert guilt trip number 5.
Guilt trip
number 5.
Guilt trip number 5.
So my big point here is that you have death by 1,000 cuts from day one. And particularly, I think for older Asians, adult Asians, and Asians that grew up in primarily non-Asian communities, just an onslaught. In the 70s and 80s, it was much worse than it is now.
Sure.
But it just goes on and on and on. And then you're sitting at home, you've had a bad day at work, you're stressed out, you go on Twitter to see if there's something that will brighten your day, which I don't understand why anyone would do that, but a lot of people do. And you see this clearly non-Asian girl in the heartland of America in Utah wearing a blatantly Chinese dress and seemingly doesn't have any idea what she's wearing, and she's just wearing it because she likes the way that it looks. And it's just one of tens of thousands of incidents, and probably a minor one at that. But it's just like again, but wait.
Yeah, sorry.
So you get hurt, and you're at home, and you're not in the world. And this isn't someone at the store asking you if you speak Chinese when you're Vietnamese, or asking you if you know Kung Fu, or making a joke about North Korea or Kim Jong-il, or, this isn't, you don't have to face these people. This is someone on the internet. And for once, you can actually say something and not really incur some kind of consequence. You can say, I don't like this.
Yeah.
For the first time in your life, you get a chance to say something, and you say something, but you don't. But here's the thing: is most people don't sit around thinking and reading and lecturing about this topic the way that I do, and so they don't even necessarily understand why they don't like this girl wearing this dress. They just get a feeling, and they don't even necessarily know they're hurt. They just know they're angry, and so they lash out on Twitter and they make a comment, and then it's perceived from the outside. That's all they see. They don't see all the times that they were nice. They don't see all the times they incurred some kind of bullshit response. They don't see all the times they were called a racist name and smiled and just sort of, I mean, I would venture to say 99% of the time I've been called a racist name to my face. I just smiled and said, "Oh my God, I hope I live through this interaction because I don't know what else this person is going to do." Very rarely have I actually struck back with something because it's just like, you just don't know what people are going to do. So that's what I see is like my fellow brothers and sisters, Asian Americans, are lashing out at something that comes from a justifiable place, but they don't know how to explain it, and it comes across like crazy talk because it kind of is.
And I think of it a little bit as a bully. So let's take a bully all of a sudden hits a kid, sends him to the hospital. And you're like, that's terrible. That kid was doing nothing to you. It's like, well, the kid was, he was eating a red lollipop. And I hate that. It's like, well, okay, that's nothing. It's like, no, you don't get it. Let me tell you my whole story. My dad beats me. He's beat me for 10 years, and he beats me. And whenever I had a red lollipop, he would beat me out of my face. I'm like, well, that's super sad, and that explains your story. And let's see how we can deal with you. Still doesn't excuse you hitting that poor kid.
Yes, in a sense.
So she's done nothing wrong, really.
Well, yes, but so here's my advice to both sides. To people like her, or really just everyone, I suppose, but particularly if you come from one of the more privileged classes, and you don't understand cultural appropriation very well, Yeah. So here's my advice to you: is just think about what you're doing just a little bit longer. It's not about being PC. It's about having empathy for other people. Do you want to be the straw that breaks someone else's back? Do you want to be that final sort of prick in their side that is just another example of, shall we say, slight insensitivity? Just think a little bit harder. Like if this girl came to me and said, "I'm thinking about wearing this dress. What do you think?" I'd be like, "Ooh, it's looks like a Chinese dress. Are you Chinese?" "No, but I just think it looks great." And I'd be like, "So, I wonder how people would feel about you doing that." I don't know. Because in my head, because I wouldn't have predicted that anyone would have cared, honestly.
Yeah. Just like no one cares if a Chinese girl wears a traditionally Western dress.
Well, I don't know. Maybe someone does. Well,
but the people that do are in the wrong.
It's not about right and wrong, Berto. It's about empathy. It's about empathy.
Well, yeah, I do think we need more empathy, but okay, but there is legal right and wrong, and in this case, no laws were broken.
Of course,
but laws can be broken.
Someone can make fun of my name. Someone can call me Chinaman.
Right, but let's say someone crossed a line, right? Like okay. Let me take a different tact. We don't know her story. What if she's an advocate for Chinese studies? What if she's like, we don't know any of that, right?
Well, we've learned it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's an accident, right? Like, it's like you were right for the wrong reasons.
Well, it's not right or wrong, Berto. It's not right or wrong. That people attacking her are not right.
Well, what I mean is your assumptions happened to be correct, that she's not Asian and blah, blah, blah. But you didn't know that. I don't mean you, like the people attack. Not only that, you could take a totally different tact, which is, oh, I see, because this tweet was from a male. Your patriarchal rules are being blah, 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 blah. Do you, like, the angle I would have taken with my outrage would have been more along the lines of like, That dress symbolizes all the oppression on women that China has exerted all the way to this day.
Okay.
With binding of the feet and all these kinds of things.
Would you really say that though?
I wouldn't, but I would see someone, I would actually have more empathy for someone coming at it from that perspective. Still not directed at her, but as an opportunity to maybe educate her.
I'm sure that'd go over well, but
as an opportunity to educate her.
Okay.
Right?
But the point is you're in a mode of right and wrong and outrage. And I'm saying I discard that whole thing as like wrong-headed from every... I never make any friends. Everyone who talks about this case, I believe, is coming at it from the wrong angle. Let me explain. Okay. Is that people don't take the whole context into consideration, including the people who are wearing the Chinese dress. Everyone is essentially innocent and trying their best. When people ask me if I have a sponsor, when someone gets upset and calls me a Chinaman because they're afraid and they're freaking out, essentially, or they've been taught that it's okay to say this thing, like everyone's innocent and trying their best. There's no right or wrong. Everyone's trying. And it's just a matter of everyone taking a step back and trying to see the bigger picture. So to the privileged people, now this is probably not the best example, but like other examples like that are more overt cultural appropriation, for example, having Tibetan prayer flags in your house or at your university without really understanding why you're doing that, or getting some permission or advertising that permission, or better yet, wearing a Native American. You're a white person who doesn't really understand the plight of Native Americans, and you have some kind of Native American potentially sacred artwork in your house or adorning your ear or something, like it's not a matter of being PC. It's a matter of just like, I wonder how someone else is going to take this.
But there's a very big difference about encouraging all of us to have those conversations. These people thrust an 18-year-old into a very public and potentially damaging limelight. And that is wrong. And it is potentially something that someone might sue over, right? Like that's a big, they crossed a huge line there.
So that's not a but, Berto, that's an and. Yeah. So it doesn't negate what I said.
Well, but you were saying
I haven't gotten to the rest. I haven't gotten to the rest of what I was saying. It doesn't negate anything I just said, what you said.
But you said that it's not right and wrong. I say there are some rights and wrongs. Like that's one difference. Well, like I do think there are some things that are right.
It's wrong to not try to have empathy for other human beings.
Agreed.
So to the marginalized and the people who have been harmed, just one, when you have an opportunity to say something, think about how you're going to come across. Like, attacking this girl, I don't know where people are coming from, but there are actual racist things that are happening in this country that are indefensible and not nuanced. And no one will accuse you of being a snowflake if you attack it. Right. So, and I understand that those things are hard to attack and they're scary, but try not to unleash all of your anger into these. The same thing happened at Evergreen State College when these students attacked these professors who were essentially on their side. I mean, you could make arguments that they weren't, but when you're upset, just try to think about where you're directing that. You're upset for a good reason in all likelihood. You have things to say, but if we're going to move our society forward with the particular topic of cultural appropriation, most people do not understand that concept at all. Right. They don't understand. They have no idea what cultural appropriation is. They can't empathize with it.
And especially, it's actually, I'll go further. It's been sold as a very positive thing because for the last, 30, 40 years, there's this message of, we want to bring American culture to the world because we think that'll increase democracy and it'll decrease, a lot of problems. So there's this thought of like, bring our culture, of course, appropriate our culture, drink our drinks, wear our clothes, listen to our music, stop doing the things that we think are bad, right? And that's been actually sold as a positive.
And it can be. And there's nothing wrong with, there's nothing inherently wrong with appropriating someone's culture. Actually, it has more to do, because that's more rules and PC stuff. It has everything to do with empathy. When I see someone, for me, wear a kamikaze headband, for example, and go, I'm a kamikaze. Like, go ahead, make fun of kamikaze. These were imperial invaders who raped and killed a bunch. If you want to make fun of a Nazi person, you want to make fun of an imperial soldier in Japan, like, go for it. Like, I don't have any empathy for those of my people. Appropriate away. Yeah. It has nothing to do with that. A white blonde girl wearing a Native American sacred thing, who has no Native in her and doesn't really understand, and a Native person who has just been, generations and generations of actual white people coming to their community and taking their children away to erase their culture, to erase their language, and to see just yet another white person wearing a sacred artifact that is meant for church or whatever. I don't even know the words. That's where the empathy comes in, of just like, I wonder how this person takes this. And so, to the marginalized, when you see something, think about how it's going to come across. And, if you felt like saying something to this girl, maybe say something like, look, I know you didn't mean any harm, but when I see you wearing this dress, it just kind of reminds me of a lot of the things that have happened to me in my life.
And like as a private message to her.
Yeah, private message. I'm not blaming you. Yeah. I'm sure you're a nice person, but I'm just letting you know that when I saw that on Twitter, it just sort of reminded me of every time a non-Asian American called me a gook or a Chinaman or appropriated my culture in all these other ways. And, no offense to you, but I just want you to know that that's how it affected me or something, or you want to do it publicly and say, I'm not blaming this girl. I'm sure she's a nice person, but I just want to say this just feels like another example of cultural appropriation. And let me list the more egregious things, ding, da, ding, da, ding, da, ding. And, so, but to me, this is a tall order because it basically requires everyone on both ends of the spectrum to really understand a pretty complicated concept called cultural appropriation and racism and colonialism and what it feels like to be on the receiving end of colonialism and all, it's a pretty complicated idea that I'm guessing isn't going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible?
I think there is a possibility that the message of thinking and reacting on a more one-on-one, more personal level to things, obviously not violently, I feel like that could have some traction. And maybe coupled along with like learning how to triage the problems so that not everything is of equal volume,
Totally.
Everything's not have to be at an 11.
Right, exactly. And the response to the 11
doesn't have to be an 11. I agree. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That's fair. And that is something like that when you pointed that out, that's like, oh yeah, that's a good point. We don't know if we're actually reacting appropriately here because this may be purposely made to make us react in this way.
And or there were, out of a billion Twitter users, yes, there were like 100 weirdos.
Yeah.
Because me as an Asian American on Twitter, I didn't do anything, and I wouldn't have. And when I did see it, I was like, come on, Asian brother, like
Right.
lay off the gas a little bit. You know what I mean? Like,
And even like, because I said, there's 100,000 likes, but a like is very different from an action in a sense. Like
but it does say something. I mean, when you said that, I was like, oh, okay, that does constitute at least passive support.
Totally, absolutely. But it definitely is like people are very free with their likes.
Right, yeah.
Like even just within my little circle, there are people that fundamentally disagree with me on a lot of stuff that I'll still see them put likes on things that I, like. So I'm just saying.
Just general support.
One like isn't necessarily we've started a movement.
Having said that, it doesn't surprise me, you know, that again, many Asian Americans are walking around death by 10,000 cuts, and when they saw this, they took a chance to unleash, and it felt good in the moment, I'm guessing, and it felt right in the moment, and then later on, I hope they figured that they might have jumped the gun a little bit. Having said that, I also will say that there is a cultural group of people who consider this kind of attack to actually be okay. They're, I don't know how to describe them exactly other than to say like kind of extreme liberals or something who have basically decided in their echo chamber that it's justified to go on the attack on situations like this, and fuck them. I don't have any sympathy for that bitch for wearing. She should have. She needs to stick to her own kind. It's just like
an 18-year-old's an adult. It's no excuses.
Right, and when I hear that kind of attitude, it shocks me because I'm like, I thought you were on my team, and you're not on my team. Right. You're on some other team. Like you consider it okay. And often what I find when I actually get to know people in that group is they have been extremely bullied in their life or abused. Like they're basically acting out a version of the abuse that they went through. They're looking for so-called justifiable targets to act out a relationship that they internalized when they're younger. Yeah. So going on to another email here is...
That was one email?
That's related, and this, I guess, will be shorter, was that I was talking about... you and I were talking about how every group can be racist, Right. Like I was talking about my Japanese American grandmother who was racist against black people. Right. I want to honor her memory by saying the story that gives me this reason because it's pretty innocent. Okay. She was 90 years old at the time, and my aunt, who was her primary caregiver, they pull up at a 7-Eleven, and my aunt gets out of the car, leaves my grandma in the car. Mm-hmm. Aunt goes into the store, is in there for a while, comes back out and gets into the car and looks over at my grandma in the passenger seat and sees that she seems upset about something. And so my aunt says, Mom, what's wrong? And she's like, don't look now. I locked the door, but there's a black man staring at me to the right. Oh. And I just need you to be very careful because there's a black man there. I can't remember the exact verbiage, sure. And my aunt's like, huh? And she looks out the window, and it's a video store, and it has a cutout of Denzel Washington.
Oh my God, no. No. Oh my God. That's like the best story ever.
So
it's a cutout of the most like friendliest guy. Oh my God.
Well, now maybe it was like, Life of Eli or Book of Eli. But so, and he's staring at her, and she saw him out of the corner of her eye. Maybe her eyesight wasn't going so well. But now I don't even know if that's a racist thing exactly. It could have been a white. Could have been like The
Rock,
or something.
Which I guess he's
Pacific Islander, yeah. But it I remember. So the story was told to me with grandma with black people or something, and now That's the only story I have.
Right.
You know, she never said anything bad.
Right.
She, you know, as far as I know, she never, you know, she was a very nice person, and she, you know, never would have did anything to black people. But that, in fact, you know, maybe I'm just making up a story that she was racist. But anyway, my point was, is we made it an episode. We talked about how anyone can be racist.
Yeah. But I mean, the reason you brought it up is because I met her, it's like the sweetest person ever.
Right.
And
yes,
you would never imagine, but there might have been some bias there. There might have been some,
bias. Exactly. Stereotyping. Yeah. For me to imagine my Japanese American grandmother having a slight bias that African Americans are more prone to criminality than non-African Americans is not a long shot. You know, it's not a shocker that someone in our society would have the idea that's been programmed into us that black people are criminals. You know what I mean? So I was talking about how everyone's racist. Everyone has categorizations and stereotypes and biases about all groups, whether that's gender related or sexuality related or
except Colombians. We don't have any negative thoughts. We are the superior people. But
what this person wrote me, and they said that a marginalized group cannot be racist. Have you heard this?
I've heard of that too.
Well, what's the argument that they make?
Because you're in a very discriminated and historically oppressed category, so you're not in a power position, and you need to be in a power position in order to really be racist.
Right, exactly. So that, and I've heard this before, so it's not like it's foreign to me. But I've processed it in my mind and talked it out with other people and read literature on the definition of racism. And really, what I call that is institutionalized racism, or more global racism, or the macro racism. You know, the idea that the premise the thesis I have is that, and it's not my thesis, it's a thesis that anyone who knows anything about racism has, which is that everyone has bias and can be prejudiced, but institutions and history and societies can be a lot more racist towards other groups than other groups. Do you know what I mean? Institutions and societies, like we have a society, institution of policing, or institution of government, or institution of welfare.
Because it's easier for a non-entity, like how corporations, it's easier for a corporation to take very unethical actions, even though you have humans working for the corporations.
Yeah, not only that, but more that when you add up the effects of not only a lot of people, but also policies that are on the books. You can have a policy of not considering race before you pull a trigger, for example. And that essentially is institutionalized racism, because it doesn't account for the high likelihood that you're mostly white, and even black cops have been known to pull the trigger against other black people more. So to say that, to not even talk about race is an example of institutionalized racism. And again, you have that power. And the oppressed can't fight back. They can't say, like, please change your policies, and no one's going to do anything about that. So it depends on your definition of racism, and I use the common definition of racism, which is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race. It's that simple, and it doesn't have anything. There's nothing in there that says as long as you have power.
Well, yeah. Not only that, like, I have a feeling. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a feeling that the folks on this side of the camp would probably, like, let's say you have a poor, fairly dispossessed, white, Southern person, and they say some really racist stuff against a black person. I don't imagine that the folks that share this opinion would say, well, that's okay. They're not being racist because they don't really have power, right? They would say, no, they have power because of their race.
Right.
And even though you'd say, like, they have very little power today.
Yeah.
And not only that, but you'd say, so, like, because, we could define something called whatever you want to call it and say, okay, how likely is this person to have the power necessary to influence laws and, policies of the city and the state and the things? Then you could call that person a more influential racist or whatever label you wanted.
Totally.
But that's very different from...
It is.
Yeah.
And I get the whole thing because, and I've had so many conversations with people along these lines and heard so many and read so much literature on this. And here's where it comes from is when, and today, but I think more in the past, when black people would say, white people are racist, white people, please understand that to be a black man in America, there's a lot of I incur a lot of racism. I experience a really a shit ton of racist acts that just really hurt my feelings that I wish didn't happen. And then certain white people would come back and say, well, I've been discriminated against too. It happens to everybody.
Right.
Like I've had black people, I went to a class once and I was like the only white person and they made jokes about white people.
Right.
And so, it happens to all of us.
Even Stevens.
Yeah, even Steven, right? And so what people started to develop was this shortcut rebuttal, which is that only the marginalized can claim that they are victims of racism.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's a bad shortcut. And when you make a shortcut like that, it negates your entire fucking argument.
Yep. Because I don't know if you've seen those clips of, oh man, it's a famous black person who was fairly influential. But anyways, he was talking. This is probably a clip from like the 70s or something, maybe 60s. And he's talking on TV and he's explaining his position. I think it's to William F. Buckley or something. And he's saying like, no, he was agreeing with a white supremacist. He's like, I agree with that person. Whites should stick to whites. Blacks should stick to whites. I don't want my black sisters marrying a white person. Like he was very much like that. So you could sort of understand the context he's coming from, which is, you murdered my people for long enough, blah, blah, blah. I want nothing to do with your people, right?
Right.
But surprisingly, because I disagree with most of his positions, William F. Buckley Jr., or whatever his full name is, he was actually disagreeing. Like, that's not the right approach. You can't just fight. In this case, fighting fire with fire leads to dissolution of society. And that's kind of the point is like, if each sect entrenches and doesn't want to play nice with all the others, even if the reason is because they were really hurt in the past, then you end up with a worse world.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a little bit of a different topic, though.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that's the extreme. Like, because I have definitely heard people come out in defense of that position. Like, well, he's got a point because the whites kept slavery was so horrible and stuff. Like, he's got a point, and I'm like, no. That's not a good point.
Yeah, that's a general policy of yours, which you're consistent about, which I'll commend you for. I think it's hard to know. Like, if I was a black person who grew up, in the 60s and was going through that, and I was just sort of fed up with the whole thing,
right.
I can imagine myself at least thinking, yeah, you know what? I don't want my black daughters marrying any of you folk either.
Right.
So, because I don't want to deal with your bullshit anymore, So I agree. Let's keep it separate. I could just imagine. Now, is that a good result? Is that like the solution?
Because
the solution is to get rid of the white supremacy, and then we don't have to have the reactionary response to that.
Another example of where this leads, and I know it's a slippery slope argument, so it's not fully valid, but there's a UFC fighter who's really good, and he's black, and he was talking about another.
And before I get hate mail, I want to say that the '60s, racism was worse back then, but it's not like it's gone away now.
Right.
So I don't want to imply that racism is gone.
Yeah, you just don't have daily public lynchings and daily, et cetera. But anyways, this person is from the States, and he's black, and he's a UFC fighter. And he was talking about another UFC fighter who's from Africa. I forget the country he's from, but he's from Africa, and he's also black. And he sounded fairly serious when he was saying, look, I have no love for this person because, I mean, I'll tell you how far back this goes. His people sold my people into slavery.
Oh.
And so, like, there's this thing about, like, well, so now this group of black people hate that group, and then this group of dispossessed people hate that, and then everyone starts hating everyone because of history, and that's what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now, right? Yeah. It's like, well, they started it because they moved, but then you did, and it's hate, and it's like, well, 2,000 years ago, well, 3,000 years ago,
yeah.
And I do like your angle about empathy, and it's like if we could somehow like mentally erase, like, and I know
right,
it's tricky,
right. So
yeah.
So it's Palestine and Jewish people who live in Israel, or people who live in Israel, whatever we want to call it. I mean, sometimes I wonder, are there some people who live in Israel not Jewish? I imagine there are. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So anyway, you have the quote unquote occupiers and the quote unquote occupied, and imagine if, and there are people who do this. But imagine if it was much more where both sides just had empathy for each other. Yeah. And we're just like, okay, what's going on with you? Yeah. And how are you doing? Well, I feel like my lands are being invaded, and your racist cops are going to move, and militia are going to move in around my town. And I'm going to worry that my wife is going to get hurt and no one's going to protect us. Yep. Okay, I get that. Let's see if we can fix that. You know what I mean? Instead of fuck you, gun to the face, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or, butt to the face. And then you turn to some other means of like, fuck it. Yeah. I'm just going to get revenge because there's nothing else to do, And so, and of course that's an oversimplification, but I didn't invent empathy, right? And I'm not the only person talking about this, right. By the way.
But the reason I was connecting it, of course, is because if we all had the attitude of like, well, since I was wrong in the past, I'm going to stick to my little cultural pocket and make sure I don't interact and none of mine interact with any other cultural pocket. And in fact, at any chance, I will sort of try to get one over them. Like, I think that leads to a very ugly world.
Yeah, I would hope that we could fix the crux of the issue so that the question and evaluation of people's reactionary responses doesn't even have to get asked. Right. But again, to put a fine point on it, anyone can be racist. Right. Anyone can discriminate or have unfair anger or hostility or inflicted pain on another person based on race.
Some of my best friends are racist.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining me. Berto, did we get in another fight today?
You did. Woo! I got some wounds.
Every episode we have to have at least one
one scuffle,
one hot moment.
Hot take.
So I wonder if the listeners get uncomfortable with that.
I wonder if that's what makes it good.
Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it. Oh, wait. Don't press stop yet.
What?
Apropos, there was this thing that just came out like yesterday or whatever. A lawyer in Manhattan is at some sort of like little food court. And the video starts with him already kind of angrily speaking to the manager or someone that works there, because his main complaint is that there was one of the employees was speaking in Spanish to one of the customers, and then someone else was also speaking in Spanish, and there was Spanish all around him. And this is America. They should be speaking English.
This is someone in Manhattan?
This is someone in Manhattan.
And this is the first time this has happened to them?
Yes. And he's very angry. And he's like, da-da-da. And he's just like, you know what? And then the lady, the ladies are starting to laugh at him and stuff. And then he's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to call ICE. And he starts like filming her. I'm calling ICE on you. Right? And then that's his thing. And then eventually he leaves. He's super angry. Like he's looking like he's ready to get in a fight, whatever. And everyone's just like laughing at him, thinking it's ridiculous. Well, then another video surfaced of him. I don't know how long ago, but it's a little while back. He was walking. You know how you talked about your thing about people not getting out of people's ways? Well, imagine this. You're in a wide Manhattan street, and you and your girlfriend are walking in one direction close to each other, and there's plenty of, it's not in the morning when it's a rush, there's plenty of space. It's like the evening. Another person is coming in the other direction. They're not actually in front of you. They see you, make eye contact, and move into your lane. And they don't just stop. They bump into you.
Yeah.
But you're actually a little bigger than them, so they get pushed back. And they start yelling at you and insulting you. They start saying, where are you from? Like,
so who was filming this time?
The guy who got bumped into pulled out his phone and started filming. So this happens, like the action's already going. We didn't see but he described it, right? And so when the phone starts filming, the guy's like, where are you from? Like, something like, he says like, you're ugly fucking foreigner, right? Blah, blah, blah. Like, all these things. By the way, the guy was born in like Massachusetts.
Yeah.
He's an American citizen. He's not at all ethnic looking.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the guy. So I think the guy's got some issues.
Everyone's ethnic looking. You mean non-white looking?
Oh, sorry. Is that not the right? Okay, sorry.
Everyone's ethnic.
Yeah. I didn't know the right terminology. So he's not white. Sorry. He is. Well, and maybe I'm being biased. He looks like a fairly average white person.
It's like a white. There's nothing wrong with saying looks like a white
Anyways,
person.
I think the guy's got some issues. But he is like this lawyer in Manhattan. You know, he looks a lot like Timothy Price in American Psycho. The guy from Taken or The Leftovers. Uh-huh. What's his that actor's name?
Aniston's husband.
Yeah. He looks a lot like that guy.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there and he loses his mind over these things. And he's very much about like foreigners and America and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So one, either he is actually mentally ill. You always have to totally account. There are a lot of untreated mentally ill people walking around.
Right.
Meaning that he's delusional or very confused or brain injured or something, or a drug addict who is coming down off crack or whatever, or two, he has fully ingested a several year dose of rhetoric and propaganda, and because of the way the propaganda is propagandized, he believes he's actually doing a good thing for society.
Yeah, could be. When I saw the first video, I just thought he was just a ridiculous jerk.
So
when I saw the second video, I was like, oh, okay, maybe there's something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, whenever someone really latches on, but I know of cases because I've been listening to podcasts that are starting to highlight the outrage in America, and they're starting to talk to, very non-mentally ill, very sound mind who have just decided that they're just going to go on the attack. They're
falling down.
Yeah. Right. Everyone is in there, or there's a growing number of people who believe they're in their own version of falling down, whether that's on the left or the right.
Yeah.
And they have no sympathy for what they perceive to be the other side, and they believe that any attack is justified. And I think they believe that the attack will be applauded. Like, look at me, I'm doing the good fight.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thing.
Yep.
Because as I say those words, that's a shade away from the Unabomber.
Yeah.
Or any kind of suicide bomber. You know, it's like you've been convinced that it's heroic to attack, and for the other side to be like,
and that there's no other choice left. You're out of options.
Right.
This is it.
Yeah. And that they deserve it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's scary. Well, on that wonderful note, let's end.
Woohoo!